The relentless grip of the Warsaw winter of 1943 carried a unique, corrosive chill, a mixture of sub-zero air and the pervasive scent of ash that clung to the stone walls. Within the sealed confines of the ghetto, the normal rhythms of life had dissolved, replaced by a mechanized countdown toward oblivion. Uniformed death moved silently through the narrow streets, indifferent to the muffled cries and the skeletal figures who offered no resistance. This environment, designed for despair, became the operational theater for an extraordinary, meticulously organized defiance. Amidst the chaos, she moved with the detached authority of a public health official, her papers granting passage through the checkpoints guarded by men whose boredom was more terrifying than their rage. She was an employee of the city's social welfare department, registered to oversee sanitation and epidemic control among the population marked for extermination. Her true identity, however, was that of a logistical mastermind, a ghost guiding souls out of purgatory. Her task was not merely dangerous. It was an act of pure administrative subversion against the largest killing machine history had ever engineered. The operation relied on precision and the chilling banality of hiding life within the machinery of death. Children, sedated with diluted narcotics, were packed into stretchers labeled for infectious diseases, slipped out through sewer lines, or concealed beneath loads of discarded construction materials. Every face pressed into her memory represented a separate, complex pathway through the German net. For each child rescued, she meticulously transcribed their birth names, their parents' true identities, and the location of their new refuge, information critical for post-war reunification, but lethal if intercepted. This secret archive, a silent testament to 2,500 lives reclaimed, was sealed within thin glass jars and carefully buried beneath the root system of a sprawling apple tree in a neighbor's garden. The pressure mounted with every successful extraction. The Gestapo, frustrated by the inexplicable leakage of individuals from the ghetto's closure, began tightening the screws, their investigation focusing on the few Polish officials with unlimited access. They sought the architect of the vanishing act. The atmosphere became thick with suspicion, the crunch of boots on frozen pavement echoing the hammer blows closing in. The inevitable breach occurred not due to poor planning, but a single, crucial moment of oversight, a whisper sold for currency, a betrayal located somewhere on the periphery of the network's trusted circle. The arresting squad arrived precisely on schedule, a methodical, jarring intrusion into the dim safety of her apartment. There was no time for negotiation, only for immediate action. With a heavy splintering sound of the forced door as her cue, the paper detailing the location of the buried jars was thrust into the hands of a trusted accomplice waiting beneath the window, seconds before she was dragged into the cold darkness. The Gestapo headquarters, a place where professional cruelty was codified, became the crucible. The officers were not interested in the grand scope of the resistance. They were interested only in the list. The interrogation was structured, persistent, and tailored to cause maximum agony while preserving the prisoner's capacity for revelation. They sought the names of the hidden children and the entire organizational structure that facilitated the exodus. Blows rained down, systematically targeting bone and nerve, the objective to extract administrative truth. She gave them only silence, a refusal so absolute it defied the very possibility of pain. Her legs were deliberately broken, the sound echoing in the concrete room, but the vital ledger remained safe, buried deep beneath the frozen earth. Decades later, long after the occupation ended and the smoke cleared, the original file concerning Action Kinder Rettung remained a source of quiet disturbance within the reorganized police archive. It detailed the torture, the condemned sentence, and the highly unusual last-minute rescue by the Polish underground, facilitated by an exorbitant bribe. But the file possessed a gaping hole: the identity of the informant who led the Germans to her door. This unanswered question, the specific logistics of the initial betrayal, demanded an investigation years after the final shot was fired, transforming the historic act of heroism into a cold case procedural centered on the ethical cost of survival and the hunt for a forgotten collaborator. A gray, unrelenting rain had been falling over Warsaw for 3 days, washing the grime of passing history into the drains. Detective Janusz Karski, assigned to the Historical Crimes Unit, traced the faint, yellowed lines of the 1943 arrest report. He was not hunting a killer, but the ghost of a compromised network. The documentation, recently declassified, was sterile, devoid of the human terror it contained. The focus of the current procedural was forensic analysis of administrative failure. How could an operation of such magnitude have functioned for so long before collapsing, and who exactly profited from the collapse? Karski's gloved fingers lifted a brittle sheet, a manifest of seized items from the 1943 raid. Beyond medical supplies and resistance pamphlets, there was a brief, almost dismissive mention of a foreign coin, French origin, dated 1938, found among the debris. This coin held no logical connection to a Polish nurse working solely within the ghetto walls. Karski circled the notation in red ink. This was the first piece of non-contextual evidence, the minute irregularity that cracked the facade of the closed case. The forensic review of the old Gestapo building, now a mundane municipal office, yielded nothing physically relevant, but the psychological mapping was critical. Karski consulted specialized historians and former resistance fighters, meticulously reconstructing the environment of constant surveillance. The investigators determined that the betrayal likely originated from someone with high-level access to either the Polish Social Welfare Office or a specific, non-Jewish resistance cell operating near the perimeter. The common ghetto inhabitants had no means of accurate, actionable intelligence concerning the network leader's whereabouts. The French coin suggested a connection to routes outside of occupied Poland, perhaps tied to international aid or smuggling. Karski assigned his younger partner, Elżbieta Wojcik, the task of tracing pre-war French currency circulation among Polish black market operators. Elżbieta's research into the war-era smuggling routes introduced a familiar name: Alexander Witkowski, a man known to have assisted various groups across the border into Hungary, often exchanging foreign currency for safe passage documents. Witkowski was later executed by the Germans in 1944 for unrelated black market activities, but his connection to foreign aid, and his known habit of keeping rare coinage as payment, made him a compelling figure of interest. The investigation shifted from the nurse's immediate arrest to the weeks leading up to it, focusing on who might have been the last person to utilize Witkowski's services regarding a transaction that failed. Karski theorized that the Gestapo might have leaned on Witkowski, or perhaps he had used the nurse's information as collateral for his own temporary freedom, a debt later repaid with his life. The discovery of a hidden diary entry in an old police safe provided the investigation with its first real breakthrough, one that pointed away from the executed smuggler. The entry, written by a low-level Gestapo clerk who had handled the initial raid paperwork, described not a confession, but a specific physical detail about the informant. The man had a distinct facial burn scar, allegedly sustained in a factory accident years earlier. This crucial detail, never included in the formal arrest report, painted a picture of someone known to the Polish underground, yet easily identifiable to the German administrators. Karski immediately cross-referenced all documented scar descriptions of individuals arrested or executed in Warsaw during late 1943. The database search flagged Mieczysław Dobrzyński, a former dockworker and low-ranking member of a splinter Polish socialist cell. Dobrzyński had been arrested 3 weeks before the nurse, charged with petty theft, yet he was inexplicably released shortly after the nurse's capture, without any formal explanation for the commutation of his sentence. Furthermore, Dobrzyński was never recorded as having testified or provided information. He simply vanished from the records after his release. The investigative team now had a living suspect, or at least, one who had officially survived the war. Karski realized that Dobrzinski's quick release and the suppressed files suggested an exchange of high-value intelligence for absolute secrecy regarding his collaboration. Karski located Dobrzinski, now an elderly, fragile man living quietly outside of Krakow, maintaining a manufactured existence built on decades of silence. The detective's confrontation was quiet, held in a small, dusty living room. Karski displayed the single piece of evidence that tied the elderly man to the past, a photograph of the French coin recovered during the search of the nurse's apartment. Dobrzinski had been paid not in cash, but in rare currency that served as his entry point into the black market, a down payment for the information he sold. The weight of 70 years of unspoken guilt fractured his composure. He confessed not to malice but to crippling fear, arrested, beaten, and offered one chance at life by trading the name of the woman who operated the relief network, a name he only knew through a desperate, overheard conversation about foreign aid and hidden children. The investigation concluded with the historical truth confirmed. The heroism was purchased at the cost of one human frailty. Dobrzinski was not prosecuted. The statute of limitations on wartime collaboration had long expired, and his testimony was required for the formal closing of the suppressed Gestapo file. Karski completed the final report, detailing the operational complexity of the rescue, the brutal efficiency of the Gestapo, and the minute vulnerability exploited by fear. The true finality lay not in a legal conviction, but in the institutional recognition of the nurse's sacrifice. Karski visited the historical garden where the apple tree still stood. Beneath it, the bronze plaque commemorating the rescued children now silently included a note about the archive that saved them. The silence was absolute, heavy with the weight of thousands of whispers now free to echo through time. Following the quiet extraction of the informant's name, the cold case investigation pivoted, shifting its focus from the initial betrayal to the long-term reverberations of the nurse's defiance. Detective Karski and his partner now dedicated themselves to understanding the psychological terrain of Warsaw immediately after the war, a landscape riddled with unpunished collaborations and suppressed guilt. This subsequent phase wasn't about filing charges, but about uncovering the ethical debt accrued by those who chose silence over truth during the communist era. The state, eager to project an image of unified resistance, actively discouraged investigations that might reveal Polish complicity or internal dissent. A critical piece of the puzzle emerged through the examination of post-war property restitution claims. Many families who had sheltered children faced intimidation and eventual displacement after 1945, particularly when the children's original Jewish families failed to return. The investigation uncovered records detailing unusual financial pressure placed upon a specific orphanage near the Vistula River, a key node in the rescue network. This orphanage, known for harboring dozens of ghetto children, was forced into a fire sale of its assets in 1947, ostensibly due to unpaid utility bills. Deeper analysis of the orphanage's ledger revealed a curious pattern of debt acceleration. The creditor was a minor administrative functionary from the wartime Municipal Sanitation Department, the same organization that had employed the heroic nurse. Building upon this administrative overlap, Karski sought interviews with surviving members of the orphanage staff, now elderly and scattered across the continent. Their recollections painted a vivid picture of quiet harassment rather than overt threat. A constant stream of code inspectors, tax auditors, and municipal oversight agents relentlessly challenged the orphanage's permits and structural integrity. Consequently, the detectives theorized that someone within the former wartime bureaucracy harbored a deep, ongoing resentment against the successful resistance movement. This individual, lacking the courage for wartime collaboration, instead chose to weaponize post-war bureaucracy against the saviors. The goal was not profit but control and vindication, a small, mean-spirited attempt to dismantle the remaining symbols of ethical triumph. Karski noted that this form of psychological terrorism, executed through paperwork, often inflicted deeper scars than a single act of violence. Another crucial layer surfaced when Elżbieta discovered a series of anonymous, unsigned letters sent to the post-war Communist Internal Security Office between 1946 and 1948. These letters, cloaked in patriotic fervor, systematically denounced individuals associated with the orphanage, labeling them as foreign agents or religious extremists. The syntax and specific governmental jargon used in the letters strongly suggested the author possessed a specialized understanding of state administrative weaknesses. The handwriting analyst confirmed the author was not the informant Dobrzinski, but a different individual entirely. Furthermore, the style of denunciation was highly precise, focusing on non-political vulnerabilities. One letter, for instance, detailed the exact specifications of a minor construction violation committed by the orphanage director in 1937, long before the war. This level of meticulous, vengeful detail indicated a person with professional access to pre-war municipal archives, a disgruntled functionary whose petty grievances transcended the moral catastrophe of the war. Now, consider how this quiet, bureaucratic enemy represents a different kind of evil than the Gestapo's blunt brutality, one that flourishes in the vacuum of accountability. Karski focused his attention on surviving municipal employees who transferred seamlessly from the wartime administration into the communist bureaucracy. He needed someone with both the motive to harbor prolonged resentment and the bureaucratic access to orchestrate a legal dismantling. The search narrowed to Tadeusz Borowski, a former records clerk who had been repeatedly passed over for promotion during the 1930s, known for his severe adherence to minor regulation. Borowski retired comfortably in the 1960s, a man whose life ambition was seemingly to enforce the tiniest, most irrelevant rules. The investigation was no longer about a rescue mission. It was about the long shadow cast by administrative mediocrity and its perverse capacity for destruction. The file closed not with a hero's statue, but with the quiet, unsettling realization that the enemies of humanity often wear the drab uniform of routine. Detective Karski sat late in the archival office, the air thick with the scent of aged paper and institutional fatigue. The initial hunt for the wartime turncoat had been a sharp, painful plunge into a specific moment of moral failure. But that closure, once achieved, had only exposed a vast, unsettling ethical landscape that stretched far beyond the confines of the occupied city. The spectacular act of courage, a blazing testament to radical humanity, was countered not just by the crushing violence of the regime, but by two distinct, persistent forms of shadow. The first shadow was the abrupt collapse caused by a single human breaking under duress, a moment of fear transmuting into devastating information. The second, more chilling shadow was the slow, deliberate work of spite that thrived in the quiet aftermath of war. He contemplated the strange weight of the evidence. It was a narrative composed of extremes, monumental sacrifice juxtaposed against the small change of betrayal, and the grand, organized cruelty of the state pitted against the prosaic malignancy of a jealous bureaucrat. The physical evidence of the investigation, the administrative trails, the archival dust, the meticulously documented debt structures, painted a picture not of instantaneous tragedy, but of protracted erosion. The network of salvation, built on trust and radical risk, had been breached by terror, yet its lasting infrastructure was dismantled piece by a cold, post-war resentment, using the very mechanisms of law and order the city had struggled to rebuild. The true implication lay in realizing that malice does not always require a uniform or an ideology to flourish. Sometimes, it merely requires a deep-seated grievance and the anonymous cover of official procedure. The men who had executed the arrests operated under extreme pressure and specific directives. The individual who orchestrated the post-war financial suffocation of the relief network operated solely out of petty, enduring vindictiveness, using ink and ledgers as weapons. This latter enemy, unseen and surviving long after the cessation of hostilities, represented a profound challenge to any notion of clean justice. How does one reconcile a lifetime of small acts of systemic sabotage with the legal finality of a closed case file? The investigation had moved from forensic analysis of violence to the psychological mapping of ethical residue. It was a journey through different strata of darkness: the abrupt darkness of wartime necessity, the moral darkness of self-preservation, and the insidious, lingering darkness of administrative malice. The files confirmed that while the Gestapo could break bones, they could not break the essential structure of the resistance. That final damage, the scattering of the survivors and the silencing of their good works, had been inflicted by one of their own, utilizing the mundane tools of the new state. This form of historical accountability, Karski realized, demanded a different kind of verdict, one delivered not by a court, but by the quiet weight of public recognition of the facts. Reflecting on this journey so far, one must acknowledge that the spectacular luminosity of heroism requires an equally unflinching view of the shadows it inevitably casts. The ultimate takeaway is not just the celebration of light, but the understanding that integrity and ethical action exist on a continuum, constantly challenged by fear and sustained by systems. The story is a mirror reflecting the agonizing truth that while great courage saves lives in moments of crisis, it is vulnerable to the long-term, corrosive power of human weakness and bureaucratic inertia. The archive, finally opened, reveals not only the names of the rescued, but the complex map of human frailty that tried, and ultimately failed, to erase them. We stand now at the threshold of understanding the full cost of keeping light alive amidst sustained darkness, ready to face the final, enduring truth. Detective Karski's gaze rested on the final sealed file, its manila folder a thin barrier separating the calculated cruelty of history from the relative quiet of the present day. The procedural hunt was complete, yielding not a satisfying courtroom triumph, but a chilling clarity regarding the multifaceted nature of darkness. The investigation had illuminated the fact that the brilliance of the nurse's defiance was not only measured against the massive machinery of the Gestapo, but also against the smaller, more insidious forces that sought to extinguish hope long after the tanks rolled away. The complexity of the case resided in the varying moral altitudes it traversed. There was the catastrophic failure of the man who sold information under torture, his act a desperate plea for survival, resulting in immediate, agonizing consequences. Yet, perhaps more disturbing was the discovery of the bureaucratic resentment, the long, sustained campaign of administrative malice waged by the records clerk, who utilized the drab anonymity of municipal paperwork to sabotage the infrastructure of good deeds. One enemy was fear given voice, the other was spite given a rubber stamp. Both sought to dismantle the legacy of compassion, proving that the human capacity for cruelty is boundless, manifesting in both overt violence and quiet, institutional persecution. Karski pushed back from the desk, the low hum of the fluorescent lights emphasizing the lateness of the hour. He realized that the greatest tragedy was not that evil existed, that was a historical certainty, but that integrity required constant vigilance against both the spectacular and the mundane forms of corruption. The children saved by the nurse were retrieved from the chaos of explicit genocide, only for the memory of their rescue to be nearly obscured by the sterile, slow-motion decay engineered by petty professional jealousies. Justice, in this context, could not be delivered through a prison sentence. It had to be delivered through the unflinching commitment to historical accuracy, ensuring that the full context of their suffering and salvation was permanently woven into the city's narrative. The ultimate resilience lay in the hidden archive, those glass jars buried beneath the apple tree. That secret register represented an act of faith, a belief that a day would come when those identities could be restored, a tangible proof that every life held inherent, undeniable value, even when facing a regime engineered to erase it. The names, once whispered and concealed, were now officially recognized, each a beacon against the attempt by both wartime collaborators and post-war functionaries to suppress the truth. Karski recognized his role as being the keeper of clarity, the one who prevented the memory of heroism from being diluted by silence or distorted by simplification. The past demands more than just heroes. It requires those willing to trace the full, ugly topology of betrayal and malice that surrounded those acts of grace. To understand the heroism fully, one must also understand the precise, mundane cost of the shadows. He closed the final file with a deliberate action, the click echoing in the stillness. The resolution was not cathartic, but foundational. The story of the nurse who defied death was now complete, anchored not just by her unparalleled courage, but by the painful understanding that vulnerability and resentment will always linger at the fringes of ethical action. The archive now stands open, not as a monument to suffering, but as an ongoing challenge, to protect the fragility of decency from the ceaseless, corrosive advance of both spectacular cruelty and quiet, administrative indifference. The weight of those 2,500 names insists upon nothing less than unwavering clarity.